Hey everyone, it's Julian. You're never too old for bedtime stories. Tonight we're going to be reading Chapter 6 of My Friend Flicka by Mary O'Hara. The Miles Square stable pasture, so called because it was nearest to the stables, was a terrain of startling wildness and beauty. A broad runway of level grass went along the county road fence on the south. North and west, it ran into low hills, with a sparse, erratic growth of large, twisted pines, and the soil here was a shallow layer over a mountain crag, which broke through everywhere in cliffs and sharp stone teeth. Out of the rock clefts grew pines and junipers. At the base of the cliff were caverns in which there were piles of skeletons and bones, remains of wild animal orgies. The cliffs overhung fragrant little dells where mushrooms and larkspur and strawberry plants pushed up through the loam and pine needles. Going north, the hills and cliffs became steeper, and, at last, in a series of broken wooden steps, plunged down to the level of Deer Creek, the mountain stream which formed the northern boundary. The stable pasture was an endless field of exploration for Howard and Ken. Just to find a new path up or down the steps, without getting pocketed somewhere from which there was hardly any way out, was a day's delight. Nell loved to wander in it, or to take a book with her for a whole afternoon in some small secret dell. Here, all summer long, the mysterious shapes of the deer stole like shadows across the shaft of sunlight. One couldn't sit very long, quiet and still and watching, without seeing the slow, determined movement of a porcupine, or the serpentine undulations of a pretty, white-striped skunk, or the awkward plunges and playful tumbling dashes of whistling pigs, or the continuous, soft movement of gophers, cottontails, and jacks. If there was no meat for dinner, Nell, or either of the boys, could take a 22 and spend an hour in the stable pasture in the late afternoon, and bring home a half-dozen tender young cottontails. That night, Rocket had the pasture all to herself. She had made the rounds of it several times. She stood now at the closed gate which opened on the country road and looked across the grassy slopes of the saddleback. They shone a bright silvery gray under the moon. Suddenly, she lifted her hind leg like a dog, swung her head savagely around, and tried to butt her bag. It was hot and bursting. She turned again and stood motionless, looking up at the range, her ears pricked. She started off at a fast trot along the fence. With long, thrusting strides, she made the ground run away from her. Her big haunches crinkled with each piston stroke. Her head was high, nose reaching up. Her sparse, irregular mane fell untidily, part on one side, part on the other side of her neck. The frayed piece of lariat was knotted about her neck and hung under the mane. A fine line of white ringed each eye. She had an angry, crazy look. She stopped at the corner of the pasture, where another barbed wire fence came in at right angles. Standing there, throwing a far, piercing gaze into the distance, her ears moving incessantly, she trembled to every sound that drifted on the still air. Suddenly, she started off again, following the cross fence. All through the rough and varied terrain of the pasture ran threads of paths. Rob had found a way down to Deer Creek for an automobile. The horses knew it from birth and covered it all, clawing their way up, leaping from ledge to ledge, sliding down on their haunches, sure-footed as mountain goats. For an hour, Rocket scoured the pasture, crashing down the steps to Deer Creek, forcing her way through the thicket on the other side of the stream, standing at the northern fence, sniffling. Far over yonder were the hay fields, Castle Rock Meadow furthest of all. It was the breeze that played over the Castle Rock Meadow, the aspen grove at the far end, that she wanted to smell. But for all her searching and listening, there was no little whimper to her ears, nor the touch of a fumbling warm tongue and lips upon her bag, nor the closeness of a nimble little shape running at her side. After a moment or two, she continued her way along the fence, going at a long swinging trot, then turned another corner and began to climb, and finally had made the complete round of the boundaries of the pasture once more. She came out of the pines, cantered down the hill, went past the stables, and pulled up at the country road fence. Standing here, she sent out a loud, ringing neigh into the night, hurling it like a fierce accusation. A mile or more away, on the saddleback, Banner heard the neigh and pricked up his ears. He appeared to appraise the importance of it, dismiss it as making no immediate demands upon him, and swung his head back again. The cry was heard, too, by the band of yearlings grazing quietly on the other side of the crest. A little golden filly, who might have been Banner in a miniature, raised her head sharply and stood alert, listening. The loud, angry neigh came again, and the sorrel filly neighed in reply, and flung herself into a gallop. On the crest of the hill she stood, looking down the country road and the stable pasture. Rocket's head was lifted, and her ears strained forward. She had heard the whinny of the little sorrel, and a shuddering took her. She began to prance up and down inside the fence, then turned and galloped away from it in the direction of Castle Rock. She had cried for her foal. There had been an answer, and one that touched her maternity, but still not the voice of the little one who so lately had been part of herself, and she was confused, and in bewilderment galloped towards the dark woods that lay between her and Castle Rock. The yearling filly neighed again and plunged down the hill towards the road. The voice tore at Rocket. She stopped, turned, an answering neigh broke from her, and suddenly indecision left her, and she reversed her direction and galloped towards the fence. Very few untrained horses are jumpers, and a western mustang will always break through a wire fence rather than leap it. But the joy and eagerness of Rocket's heart gave her wings, and she made a beautiful, clean jump over the wires, and the two horses rushed to each other, pressed their cheeks together, intertwined their heads and neck with loving, excited whinnies. Rocket wanted more. Her bursting bag, this colt, as well as the little one she had lost. Surely this yearling child of hers could take the milk that was causing her agony. Her voice coaxed. She turned herself in the proper position to the little sorrel and whinnied again. But the yearling had been on grass for 6 months. The instinct to nurse was dead. It stood unresponsive, head turned back towards the hill, where now it heard its comrades running. Rocket whinnied again in desperation. She swung her haunches close to the colt. The youngster answered with a sensitive and affectionate neigh, and turned to rest its head on top of the mare's haunches. Rocket moved closer. The golden head slipped down and sideways. At last it was there, reaching under, fumbling for the teat. Rocket stood motionless, her head turned over the haunch of the nursing yearling. An hour later, the black mare and the golden yearling were cantering side by side. They had left the ranch and the saddleback far behind them. Ahead of them were the broken headlands of the Colorado border, and in their nostrils the smell of the snow from the faraway mountains of the Never Summer Range. We'll read our next chapter tomorrow. Good night.